James was running in the woods when he suddenly ran into this strange-looking object. It seemed like a shuttle, but he had never seen anything like this before, and when he got closer, he heard a loud noise from the inside. But before we start our story, smash the like button, make sure to subscribe, and hit the notifications bell so you won't miss any new stories. James was just too curious and wanted to know what was inside. Maybe it needed help. James was deadly curious about what he was dealing with, but when he got confronted by a park ranger, this curiosity quickly made way for fear. James had no idea where the ranger was taking him. He was scared, but it was not like he could just escape from the man. He had weighed out his option and found that it was probably smart to cooperate as best he could, at least till he got an explanation. But the explanation he eventually got was unlike anything he could have expected. It was even difficult to comprehend, but what he did clearly understand was that the ranger had been right. He should have never found the strange object. But now, there was no way back for James, and he would have to face the consequences of his curiosity. But what was the object James found in the forest? Why was he not supposed to see it? And what was going to happen to him now that he had? What the hell was that? James was startled beyond belief when he, out of nowhere, heard a very loud bang coming from deep inside the forest. It was like something exploded, and it almost felt like it made the ground shake. These woods were normally so quiet and peaceful. That is mainly why he liked to hike here so often. He had never heard anything even close to that before. His head was telling him to get as far away from whatever that was as possible, but he could not help but feel incredibly curious. Also, if there were people or animals involved with that loud bang, they probably needed help, and they were very far away from any civilization at this point. James might have even been the only person to hear that sound, so he could be their only hope. So against his better judgment, James started to hike in the direction the sound had come from. He had no idea how far he needed to travel, but he was determined. But it would eventually turn out that it would have been better for him if he had just turned around and gone home. The longer James was hiking, the less sure he became of where he was going. He had not heard the sound or anything like it since the first bang. He did not even have any idea what he was exactly looking for. Maybe he had already passed it, or maybe there was nothing to be found in the first place. But James did not need to wait much longer, and he did not need to worry whether he would be able to find the source of the sound. He could see the out-of-place gray colors from a mile away. He first thought he just stumbled up onto a big rock, but this was something very different. James knew he had to investigate. As he got closer, the more and more it looked unnatural. This wasn't anything formed in nature. James wasn't even sure it could be produced by humans, but he quickly threw that thought aside. Humans had to have made this, but what was it? James was finally standing right in front of the object. It was huge compared to him. He had no idea what it was. How did it get here? Could it have made the loud bang that he had heard? Who else knew about it? He had too many questions and not enough answers. So, he had to keep investigating. Although it definitely was man-made, that didn't mean that it wasn't from outer space. It could have fallen from space, and the bang was the noise it made when it hit the ground. But as James continued to look around, that option quickly became impossible. The treetops overhead were completely intact, not a branch out of place. Nothing had falling down around the object, so it couldn't have come crashing down from space. Also, there wasn't much of an indent in the ground. Wouldn't an object from space leave a big impact? There had to be another answer. James leaned down and tried to look under the object. It seemed to be connected to the ground, or at least something underneath the ground. There were wires coming out of a black pipe at the bottom of the object, and they went straight down under the earth. He tried to dig out the wires a bit. Moving the dirt was difficult, and he seemed to be getting nowhere. The wires continued to go further and further, but he couldn't dig anymore. Whatever the object was, it certainly had power going to it. James was becoming more and more curious. He had to know what it was. He started to walk around the object again. If there was power, there had to be a way into it. Maybe a latch or a small air hole? Anything would do. He just needed a peek inside. Although it would be way cooler if he could get inside somehow. But would James get his wish? All that James was able to find was a circular hole that was closed off by a thick steel door. There was no getting in that way. He'd have to try and find another way. But there was nothing. Whoever had put this here didn't want anybody getting in. They probably didn't want anyone knowing about it at all. He continued to look at the object, but James knew that the day was starting to end. He was curious about this mystery, but he also knew that the sun would be going down and he needed to get back home. But then it suddenly happened again. It came completely out of nowhere. A loud bang rang out. It felt 10 times louder now that James was standing right next to the object. It was as if a bomb had gone off right next to his head. Perhaps it had. The ringing in James's head was so loud that it was as if his brain was shut completely off. He couldn't see straight, and there was nothing but the ringing in his ears. Eventually, he passed out, leaving himself defenseless and at the mercy of the forest. James could feel himself coming back into consciousness. He had no idea where he was or how long he had been out. He could barely see anything, and the ringing was still in his ears but faded now. All he really knew was that someone, or something, was carrying him away from the object. The forest slowly passed him by, and in the distance, the gray object got further and further out of reach. Maybe whoever had put it there was carrying him away. Maybe they wouldn't let him go home. Maybe they wouldn't let him go at all. He was starting to get nervous, but felt too weak to do anything yet. The person who was carrying him seemed to be doing it with ease. They were clearly strong. Now that James was starting to gain his senses again, he tried to resist the grip of what he assumed was a man. As soon as the men felt James move, he stopped. That was even scarier. Who was James with? The man dumped James off of his shoulder, and it was only then that James was able to get a good look at him. Judging by the outfit that the man was wearing, he knew immediately who he was dealing with. This was a park ranger, but would he help James? And did he know what that object was? As it turned out, James had stumbled upon a secret experiment that was being conducted in the forest. With small, controlled explosions, they were trying to induce a chemical reaction. But these experiments were supposed to be kept hidden from the public, so James was paid for his silence.